Jeremiah 9. If only my head were a pool of water and my eyes a fountain of tears, I would weep day and night for all my people who have been slaughtered. That just spoke to me, man. Sometimes I weep for you guys out there, and I weep for myself, and I weep for my country. I just get depressed. I'm not going to lie. I get depressed when I talk about these things, current events, politics, the division in the church, the division between men and women. Things are looking really bleak, man. And this verse just spoke to me. I weep, man. I don't know if I really weep. I don't cry tears over it really, but man, I weep. I weep for you guys out there, you gals out there. And I weep for the church. I weep for just our country, everything going on. But today, well, there's not really a but there. Today, I had an interesting realization. And it was when I was leaving the gym. And I'll tell the story that goes with it, right? But essentially the realization was that a lot of the frustration we have in life, and in this particular instance with girls, right, as men, and then maybe with women too, and their frustrations with guys, is that our expectations are not met. Excuse me. We expect something from women as men, and maybe women expect something from men, and they don't get it. And the problem, and that's when you get sad, that's when you get frustrated, right? That's when you get red pilled, that's when you get whatever. So what is the problem here? Schopenhauer talked about this before, I think, where he talked about lowering our expectations, expecting very little, so a lot of things will bring us joy. The problem is that our expectations are not met. But if you expected something, right, that you had a right to expect, then you also have a right to be frustrated when it lets you down. Like, for instance, your parents. Your parents are supposed to take care of you. If you have parents that were crappy and that did not take care of you, then you have a right to be upset. You had this expectation that was totally justified because that is their role. Your expectation was totally justified. At the bare minimum, your parents should take care of you. So when they don't, you are right to be frustrated and to be upset because that's messed up. But the problem is when we have expectations that aren't realistic. Actually, I don't even like to use that because people throw that around too much. When we have expectations that are ludicrous, that are not founded in reality, those are the key words there, that aren't founded in reality, well, we know most of the time they're not going to come true. So most of the time, we're going to get frustrated, if not all the time, right? So here's how I'm thinking about this, right? And it can apply to anything, right? In life, if you expect everything to be easy, which is not founded in reality, right? But if you expect things to be easy, well, when they're not, which they inevitably won't, you'll get depressed and sad and whatnot, but it's not justified because you should not have had that expectation, right? So that's one example. But I'm thinking even today, right, with women, there's this big divide between men and women, and we know it because we're not having babies anymore. We're not getting married. If we get married, it's at a later age. And then we end up having less kids. And then we end up just kind of disappearing as a race, as a society, right? So what happens, so it's just inevitable. It's true, man. I talk about it a lot, and you can just, if you do a little bit of research, you'll know that something's messed up. It's unprecedented, the times we're in, as far as how relationships are built. And, it's like divorce is a big problem, but also the fact, like, these days, we're just not even having kids and getting married and stuff like that. And there's a lot of factors, right? But one of the big ones, actually not even just a factor in why people don't get married, but why there's frustration between the sexes, is that they have expectations that aren't based in reality. Okay? So for women, maybe this, they're on social media a lot. We know the average woman, her typical day is just doom scrolling and being on Instagram and TikTok. That's just kind of what they do these days. A lot of them. So they have this expectation by what they see on people that are influencers, right? Affluent people that are influencers, that have money, that are earning stuff from this. They're showing you their best side. And of course, they're going to be affluent, right? Because they're influencers and they have lots of followers. So they see this tiny, tiny, tiny percentage of whether it's men or families and the lifestyles they're living. So they have these expectations. And we know this is true because I talked about it in a previous video where we went over why people weren't getting together. And for men, it was that they didn't feel comfortable, since like Me Too stuff and feminism, talking to women and approaching women, and rightfully so. And women felt that men didn't meet their expectations, right? That was the given answer for women in this study. So anyways, they look at this, what they think should be their standard of living and the way they should be living, right? Or the way their man should be. And then they interact with men and they find out that's not the case. That they've been fed a lie, which of course you've been fed a lie. It's on social media, man. It's all doctored up. It's got everything's doctored up to make it look good. So anyways, they have that frustration where they have this expectation for what guys should be. Certain height, certain amount of money. And it's very true. It sounds redundant because it gets talked about a lot. But it's real, man. And women get frustrated that men aren't like that. So anyways, and men, the biggest realization I had today was men have this expectation that women are, and that girls are, they're like them. As far as women have similar aptitudes and proclivities to whatever traits in whatever degree that men have. Like, women are going to be just as trustworthy as men. They're going to be just as responsible as men. They're going to be just as brave as men. They're going to be just as, fill in the blank. Whatever trait that guys have. And this lie, this idea, it's not like some men have it and they shouldn't. They've been fed it by society, by the culture, by media, by movies, right? These movies and frankly, they've been fed it by the church. They've been fed this idea that men and women are, there's some differences. They'll say there's some differences, right? Maybe women are just a little more, I love that they say women are more care-oriented and they're more empathetic, which is true, but they don't like to say women are more emotional or irrational. But in reality, that's part of the picture. That's part of the picture. And because they don't necessarily need to be, right? Women don't need to be. Not if they're fulfilling their right role, as mothers, as caretakers and builders of the culture and the family, right? The gatekeepers of the family. But regardless, they don't have the same traits as men. And men don't have the same traits as women. It's not just a few small differences, right? They're entirely different. And it's not like just the left has fed as this. And it's not like just the feminist movement or the woke movement has fed as this. This isn't the message of some transgender activist or gender fluid activist saying, oh, we're all the same. No, it goes even deeper than that. It's not the extreme, right? I'm saying even in the traditional, conservative, modern, religious culture, these true differences aren't recognized. The Bible isn't read in its entirety. I'm not even going to go through it because we've gone through it before, right, on this channel, but how Paul even recognized women's tendencies to meddle in other people's business and gossip when they're single, and that's why he encourages the young widows to marry. That is the reason he gives. That isn't a reason I give. That's a reason that Timothy chapter 5, 1 Timothy chapter 5, I believe. And he gives these specific reasons, and there's multiple times in Scripture in the New Testament where he talks about these differences, right? And they don't sound good, and they sound kind of negative, but frankly, they're true. And that's because they don't sound good, because they sound misogynistic. The church likes to avoid them. They very much like to avoid them, and they also like to play the other side, which is like, oh, Jesus came to empower women, which is not true. That's totally not the case. It's like, oh, because Jesus spoke to a woman at a well, because he spoke to the woman at the well, Jesus was a feminist, and he came to lift women up. It's not true, but it's a message we've all heard. For some reason, they like to draw that conclusion from the story of Jesus talking with the woman at the well. I've heard it many times. So anywho, so it's everywhere. It's not just in the left. It's not just in liberalism, in the woke movement. It's everywhere. So anyways, what you get is men that, and women, frankly, despite reality, despite experiences, they are still hoping for the same type of affection and loyalty and friendship and just responsibility and standards that you would get from a man, a good man. They expect that from a woman or a good woman. And that's just not the case. It's not the case in the Bible. That's why women were not appointed to be leaders in the church. Their proclivity to being deceived, stuff like that. This is not me just giving my opinion. It's, if you're in the Word, you'll find that out yourself. You might not find it in church, but if you're actually reading the Bible, you'll figure that out. And it sounds negative, but it's in there, right? Don't hate the messenger. Hate the message if you want to. And then, of course, if you want to go into the Old Testament, right, you'll find similar, I would say even more blunt descriptions of these differences and whatnot, right? Hence the patriarch system, among other reasons. So anyways, we've got this corrupted idea of the benevolent, altruistic Christian woman, right? Maybe church-going woman, that she's going to be all these things to everyone, right? Because she's a woman and because she's good and because she's, but you'll find out that that's not always the case. A lot of the times it's not the case. And men get frustrated with this. Men get frustrated that women act like children. They get frustrated that women seek after material things. They seek after money. That they do often prioritize money in relationships. They get frustrated that women don't take responsibility. Men get frustrated that women can be cruel. Not only they can be mean to each other as girls, but they can secretly sabotage men willingly and have no remorse, right? And it's not just the worst of women, it's a lot of women. Even the church-going women, right? So the frustration is, the problem is that, and the reason there's frustration is that we don't expect it. We don't see it coming, right? We've been told and lied to by the church and by our culture and by movies, the way movies portray it in Hollywood, that this isn't the case, that these differences aren't real. Even though you can find them in the Bible, but you can also just find them through everyday life. And men have believed this lie, and kind of justifiably, because of how strategic and subtle it's been and how it's been everywhere. And those expectations aren't met, and we're surprised, we're caught off guard, right? I think everything would turn around if we realized the truth. If we realized these differences, and we stop believing these lies. And it would be good for men and women, right? Are we frustrated when, like a 6-year-old kid, maybe he eats a cookie out of the cookie jar or whatever, and maybe he fibs about it. Or he does something, he doesn't clean up his room, he makes excuses, right? Maybe if you're a parent, you want to teach your kid, so you discipline them and you teach them. But you're not caught off guard, you're not surprised because it's a child. And children act like children. Now, if a man did that, that'd be a different story, right? That's not excusable. We have expectations for men. But the problem is, women act like women. Society wants to say, no, they don't. They act like men. It's not true. Women often act childish, right? But we're surprised. We're like, what? And then we get frustrated. But I think if, like a child, if we looked at children like children, and we looked at women like women, we wouldn't get as frustrated. We wouldn't be caught off guard. I was even thinking today, I go to the gym, and I meet one of my buddies, right? And he's there, and shoot, I should have grabbed a water. And we talk for a while, we catch up on life. He had some things going on, so really good time, right? We're just like brothers, there's that love there. And anyways, we finish up, and that was like right when I came to the gym. I hadn't even started working out. We started. So, but anyways, we get back to it, do our own thing. He leaves. So I'm working out. And I get a text from this girl that I know. And she says, I see you. Or her text says, I see you. And I look over, and there's my friend. She's doing some lift. And she's looking over at me and smiling. And I see her after. I look down on my phone, and then I look up. I see her across the gym. I'm like, oh, okay. I smile back. And we sent a few texts back and forth and kind of just joke. I'm like, all right, catch me before you leave. Whatever, we'll talk later. Because she had just been to Florida. And she was like, yeah, haha, something, I will, or something like that. And I didn't think anything of it, and I went back to working out, right? So anyway, she ends up, I don't even know. I got doing my lift, and she did her lifts and went to tan, and then I think took off after that. And at first I was kind of like, that's weird. I was a little bit perturbed, because if my buddy had done that, or if I had done that to my buddy, I would be a little bit upset. I would be a little bit like, what the heck, bro? Why, you don't know why you were trying to talk with me and then you didn't and whatever. And I might say something to him, right? And he'd be like, oh, okay, whatever. Well, to be honest, that probably wouldn't happen. At least not with any of my buddies. If we're at the gym, we're going to say hey to each other. We're going to whatever. Or if I told my buddy, hey, I'll catch you at the end, I'm not going to leave without saying hey, even if it's quick. I got my coat on, I'm going to run over and say hey, hey before I leave or whatever. Especially if I said I was going to do it. So anyways, if a guy had done that to me, rightfully so, I would be a little bit upset, not very upset, right? But I've been a little bit upset because I have an expectation, right, for men that we're men of our word. What is a man but his word? We always talk about men in their word. You got to be a man of your word. A man of your word, right? We have that expectation for men, rightfully so. But I realized the only reason I'm frustrated that this girl did that, the only reason I'm frustrated, it's not because I particularly wanted to talk to her a lot. She was the one that was seeing me across the gym and trying to get my attention, right? My frustration was that I thought she was going to be a woman of her word, right? And I was a little bit surprised. I was like, okay, all right, you're just going to leave. And I wasn't even really frustrated at the fact that we didn't talk. I didn't go there to talk with her at the gym. But it just kind of caught me off guard. I was kind of surprised she did that. But the more I thought about it, it's like, dude, the only reason you're frustrated, which I really wasn't, but it's because I expected her to be a woman of her word. I expected her, I was holding her to the standard of a man, right? I was holding her to the standard of a man, which is when you say you're going to do something, you're going to do it, right? No big deal, just do it, especially when it's really simple and easy. But then I kind of flipped the script. I was like, you know what? Who cares? I had to remind myself she's a woman. And women tend to do things that are easy, that are comfortable for them. And they tend to not, in a lot of ways, take responsibility. And it's like that song, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, right? Girls just want to have fun. There's truth to it, right? And kind of like all the frustration kind of left when I realized that. It's like, dude, that's that propaganda, those lies that have been fed to you, and that's why you're frustrated. So, I don't know, it's kind of long-winded way to say it, but what we've got is we've got these men that are expecting certain things from women, and they're just not going to see them because women don't have them. They don't have the capacity for them. At least not to the extent that men do. And this is true of, this is true in the sense that we all know we hold men to a higher standard. We wouldn't expect a man, especially like a man in political power, that did something wrong, right? We're quick to jump on them. We're quick to, and rightfully so. You know, you're supposed to be a leader, a man of stature. Men take responsibility. Men do what's hard. We hold men to that standard. And I think that's a good standard, right? We have that expectation of men because those are manly qualities. They're good qualities, right? They're qualities that women, to a large degree, don't possess. We wouldn't necessarily expect a woman to die for someone else, to die for her country, to die for, whoever, or to put herself in harm's way, right? That's why men walk on the one side of the sidewalk. These are general ideas that we don't necessarily flesh out, but they're just kind of there, The idea of chivalry, men having that role. But the problem is that women have been painted to be all these good things, right? Everything that a man can be and that a man is supposed to be, right? Benevolent, a man of his word, ruthlessly taking responsibility for all his actions, those expectations we have of men, right? Society would say we're all the same, and you can hold women to that standard. But if you do, you're going to be very disappointed. Very disappointed. So we kind of have to escape that mindset and realize these are all lies. These are all lies we've been fed through the feminist movement, through certain churches, through weak Christianity, through Hollywood. And if we can actively just know to essentially lower our expectations of women, in a sense, women are going to act like women. At times they're going to act childish and whatever's best in their best interest. They're going to do that stuff. If we can recognize that publicly, then I think there'll be a lot less frustration to go around, right? Just an idea I had. I think of Schopenhauer. He had an interesting take on women. Very interesting. I have a few quotes here brought up by him. Yeah, I feel like I can't even say some of these. Women always take things personally, and their mind is designed to achieve personal ends. In their hearts, women think that it's men's business to earn money and theirs to spend it. There's even another one that he's kind of famous for. Women remain children all their lives, for they always see only what is near at hand Cling to the present. Take the appearance of a thing for reality and prefer trifling matters to the most important. So I'm not going to sit here and try to convince you of all those things he was saying, but I'm just saying that he had a different view of women, one that would be very unpopular today, one that sounds negative. But in reality, if we had more of that approach, more of that thinking, then I don't think we would be angry, when women do the things they do. When they do things that we say are, oh, they're complicated. Women are complicated. They're not complicated. They just, at times, do things that men would never do. They oftentimes act childish or just look at the appearance of things and take it for reality, like Schopenhauer says. Or they think of their own personal end in mind and seek comfort, right? They're not going to strive for those higher ideals like men do, right? If we can have that approach and understand that, not necessarily in a negative way, but just a practical way, that this is the reality of things, right? This is why Scripture talks about women being silent in church and not having positions of leadership. This is why there was a patriarch system that worked for thousands of years. And then all of a sudden, we're woke in the last 100 years and we're thinking there's no reason for all these ideas. These were just, bitter, power-hungry men that just were totally disillusioned for thousands of years, all these cultures. They didn't know what men and women are like, so they were just really oppressive. Maybe they knew. Maybe they knew. And they probably, people at this time, in past times, in more patriarch type societies, they probably were not as frustrated with women as we are today because they didn't believe these lies about women that we believe today. So anyway, just a thought I had recently, and I think that's a practical step that we can, have. Like, women still need to be held to a certain standard, right? And that can be many things. That can be a standard of chastity, a standard of behavior in public, a standard of ladylike composure and the way they talk and the way they act, right? Women have their own standards that for a long time we used to have. And women were expected to, meet them. Just like men were. And men still are today, but women largely aren't. So the standards need to stay, but the expectations, that's a different story. That we need to shift the way we view women. And I think life will be a lot better for men, and in turn, life will be a lot better for women.